right now. Are there some warning signs that maybe you should be looking for, or a little bit of judgment when it comes to the books that their kids may be reading?
There are several. Are the authority figures respected? For one thing, there's some stories where every adult is either evil or stupid. Do the kids in the stories, are they rewarded for good behavior, or are they punished for bad behavior? Does the story reward them if they do something bad? That's something else to watch out for.
So you want to look for moral judgments, and then the rewards or consequences.
Yes, exactly. Is the God figure respectable and truthful and trustworthy, or is he capricious and untrustworthy? Is violence gratuitous, or is there a purpose for the violence? Does it advance the story, and does it rescue somebody? Does it free a captive? The violence needs to be purposeful. So there are several guidelines like that to watch out for.
Wonderful. Our guest, Bryan Davis, has become one of the leading contemporary storytellers among young adult readers today. And it's great to have you with us, Bryan.
Well, thank you.
Your wife is with us, kind of watching off in the wings there, and learned that you've got 7 kids of your own, that you've kind of navigated the waters of childbearing.
My wife is a saint, there's no doubt.
Now, how did you get started in writing fantasy? Was it something you kind of grew up with? Were you emulating, or did you admire many of the classic writers of the day?
Well, the fantasy started because I had a dream one night about a boy who could breathe fire. And I had been writing some for my kids because they're all homeschooled, and teaching them how to write, I was writing a story for them. Well, when I came up with this dream, my eldest son, who's now 26, he was 13 at the time, said, "Dad, you should write something about that dream. Then it would be a fantasy story, and then I'd like it a lot better than other stuff you're writing." So I asked him, "Well, what is it about fantasy that's so attractive?" And he told me, "Well, it helps me to see beyond the senses. You know how the Bible says we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but with principalities and powers? Well, kids need to see beyond their physical senses. They need to learn to expand their minds to see the spiritual." And that's what fantasy does. And my oldest son, he's read Lord of the Rings 18 times.
You're kidding.
I'm not. And
18?
18 times.
See, my son's on his 3rd time through the trilogy. I think it's his 3rd. It might be his 4th. I'm not sure. But I thought, man, we got to get something else for this kid to do here. But your son read it 18 times.
Yes. And,
wow.
And so we developed this dream idea into a story which eventually became Dragons in Our Midst. And that started a rebirth in the Christian fantasy genre.
You know, fantasy can be somewhat controversial for Christians because there is that fine line between talking about a fantasy and emphasizing Christian principles and going off into something well beyond that. How tough is it for you to walk that line as you write?
Well, I'm very careful because I'm, as a parent of 7 children, I watch what my kids read, and I review everything. And so parents who are careful, I congratulate them. If you're concerned about fantasy, you ought to be, because there are some dark fantasies out there and authors who do cross some lines they shouldn't be crossing. So I'm very careful. I look at the, Jesus used fantasy. A lot of people don't realize that. He talked about a camel passing through the eye of a needle, and he used fantasy elements with making a fig tree wither, walking on water, making a coin appear in the mouth of fish. But he had the power to make them come true, which is the big difference. Yeah. So, because he knew that when we see the fantastic with our mind's eye, it expands our minds to be able to say, well, there is a real Jesus who rose from the dead. That really did happen. It helps us to be able to believe that, and that there are angels and demons. So the fantasy genre allows us to do that. But as you said, we shouldn't cross the line into saying that, well, now you can use magic, or so we stay away from the things that the Bible stays away from.
Right, keeping the elements of good and evil intact.
Right.
As you're just sharing this, I'm thinking of John, the Apostle John's revelation on the Isle of Patmos, and the Book of Revelation, how really fantastic the imagery is
right,
of that itself.
With long hair and all
sorts
of
teeth of a lion and heads of men, and all that kind of thing. Yeah. Now, with regards to the kind of the audience that you write for, is that just something that naturally developed out of your relationship with your children, and how do you kind of target that? Do you do that intentionally, or do you kind of think about your own children, or do you go outside of that to do some research and kind of find out what's pressing kids' buttons these days?
I do both. I definitely do both. I had 4 teenagers at the same time, so I had a lot of feedback and be able to bounce the ideas off them. But I also wanted to expand. I visited public schools, I visited Christian schools, so I got a good idea of what kids are thinking about today. And what I've learned is they like stories that are very complex and very deep. A lot of authors think, well, you have to write down to young people. I think you have to make them more complex and more challenging because they want to dig in. They want to ask questions. And I found that the deeper and more complex I make it, the more they like it. And I like that kind of writing, too.
And you've really tried to reach out to them in other ways, too, besides the books. You know that they're connected to the Internet, and so you've used that as a tool to talk to them. Tell me about